Okay, once again, welcome everyone, and especially welcome to our featured guest today, Dr. Peter Harteloh, whom I will introduce in just a moment. First, let me say, Peter, we do this, almost every other month. We've had quite a few Agoras. In general, they're attended by a very interesting group of people, so there's a nice interaction. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions conversationally for around 45 minutes, and then we'll
Okay.
throw the floor open and we'll let anyone jump in. And I'm sure you'll be able to handle and field all the questions. You're a very experienced practitioner. But welcome, everyone. Kevin, Bettina, Rick, Jose, Karen, Ines. I'm seeing some people for the first time here, which is great. And Megan, Sarah, and Bettina again. Okay, wonderful. Peter, we have just had a very full month. We were in, as you well know, Zagreb for a whole series of events that
Yeah.
kept us quite busy. It was wonderful. We had our annual meeting, APPA's annual meeting yesterday, and that was an all-day affair. So some people may be taking the day off today. Eventually, this gets uploaded to YouTube. So those who have missed live, what we're going to do,
Good.
be able to catch up on the video. But we're going to do this. I'm really excited at the opportunity to interview you. And also, I know that you're sticking around probably for a while, but I'll be off to Korea next week. I think we talked about that in Zagreb. And that will carry on the summer's very busy schedule of philosophical practice events. But let me introduce you officially, and then we'll get rolling with questions. So, Peter Harteloh holds an MD, 1987, and a PhD in philosophy in 2000. Since 2007, he's worked part-time as a philosophical practitioner with a focus on individual consultations, Socratic group dialogue, and philosophical walks. And he conducts courses on the art of living. He is the founder of the Erasmus Institute for Philosophical Practice in the Netherlands. He was the secretary for 3 years and president for another three of the Dutch Association for Philosophical Practice. He's published papers on the development and nature of philosophical practice in national and international journals and has conducted many workshops in Europe and Asia. His priority of research is on the relationship between concepts and places, what he calls placefulness. And we're going to get into that today in a little bit more depth because I think you're doing something that's fairly unique with your philosophical walks.
Yeah.
But before we come to that, Peter, let's roll the clock back. I'd like to ask you about your early years. Initially, you were drawn to medicine. How did you initiate your career in medicine? You were a medical doctor for some time. Tell us about that.
Yes, but let me start out in my first let's say connection with philosophical practice was already during my medical study. Because then I took some courses on philosophy. I was reading Descartes, his Discours de la Méthode, and I really recognized myself very strongly in his thinking, in his ideas. I was actually thinking like Descartes.
In terms of
And
skepticism,
yeah, please repeat. This was not.
in terms of being a skeptic.
Yes, in terms of being a skeptic and a kind of methodical doubt. His methodical doubt, very important to turn the skeptic life attitude in a kind of method. His self-knowledge, I think, therefore I am. Self-knowledge was actually my motivation for going to study medicine, because I had the idea that by studying the other in all his, let's say, in wellness, in health, in sickness, by studying the other, you get to know yourself. And that was primarily my motivation to go into medicine. But so his self-knowledge, his methodical doubt, I thought, hey, this is me, a very strong, let's say, recognition of myself in philosophy. And this is, I think, important to capture, because as you might still know that in academic philosophy, often it is denied that the study of philosophy has anything to do with yourself, and you can study it like mechanics or physics, without being involved yourself, you know. But my first, let's say, love of philosophy was because I recognized myself in philosophy and in a philosopher in case of Descartes. And this repeated itself several times during my life. But while studying medicine, so I became an assistant, a student assistant of a department, philosophy of medicine. And I had to organize lectures and meetings for medical students. And that was, of course, I think, a second pillar of philosophical practice, translating academical philosophy to the general public. But in this case, it was translating academical philosophy to physicians and to medical students. And it was a struggle. We were not very successful. There were very little number of a very small number of attendants to our meetings that we organized. So I was experiencing the struggle of translating academical philosophical ideas to the other in a very early phase. You know, in the 80s, that was also in the Netherlands that philosophical practice became a thing, a real thing, and became popular, you might say. The public philosophy, as we call it, was spreading around. But I was not part of that movement then. I would say that I myself am a kind of second generation. I think you had Ida Jongsma in this series too, and she was really one of the first generation with Hogendijk and Dries Boele going out to study Achenbach in Germany, and then taking home his kind of style, his private practice to the Netherlands, and they started private practices there too. So, but I was not part of that movement. I was studying medicine, getting into a medical career, and trying, of course, to integrate philosophy and medicine.
Right, but this was also before biomedical ethics took off as a serious
Right,
discipline.
right.
So you were really in the dark because doctors
right.
at that point were not going to see probably medical students who have more than enough work to do. We're not going to see any immediate benefit from reading philosophy texts.
Right.
So
we were always criticized by the philosophers on the one hand who say, hey, what you're doing is not philosophical enough. You might know that critique. While the physicians and the medical students say, hey, what you're doing is too philosophical, you know, has no practical value, we cannot do anything with it. And actually, remark is that in that 80s, we already met the Socratic dialogue. So we were doing courses on Socratic dialogue for medical students to use when they talk with their patients and about issues and that transcend, you might say, the actual putting a diagnosis or something. And so we were actually teaching and profiting then from the Nelsonian style Socratic dialogue. You know, that was also part of the program of the philosophy of medicine. But indeed, we were in a kind of in between, in the darkness, you might say. And then important to notice is that my idea was that psychiatry as a discipline would be the best way to integrate medicine and philosophy. And then I might say my attempts to do that in psychiatry turned into a disappointment. I didn't succeed in integrating medicine and philosophy in a kind of formal way. You know, the topic of psychiatry and working in psychiatry is very, very formalized, very protocolized and restricted. So I could not really get any further with my integration of philosophy. And so that was actually the point in about 2006 when I left medicine. I discovered philosophical practice because there was a course organized by the Dutch Association of Philosophical Practitioners. And in that course, I really found, hey, this is the thing I'm looking for. So I took a 1-year course into medical consultations. I took courses in Socratic dialogue, because a feature of the Dutch Association of Philosophical Practice is, as you might know, is that we call it Association for Medical Practice, because all kind of philosophical practitioners are members of that organization. So the Dutch Association of Philosophical Practice I'm speaking about. There are people doing Socratic dialogue, people doing philosophical consultations, philosophy with kids, with children, business philosophy, all into one association, in order that they can enhance and interchange their experience.
Yes, I mean,
But
we learned
yeah,
a lot from our Dutch colleagues, in terms of Socratic dialogue,
yeah,
particularly, and also dilemma training from Henk
yeah,
van Looy. You must have remembered
yeah,
him, and so forth. And we always, because I think that there's a great deal of commonality between sort of Dutch practicality and American pragmatism, and we also
yeah,
like to practice across the spectrum. We don't want to. Some people are definitely specialists and should be, but many of us like to practice across a broader spectrum, and I think that's very much what the Dutch like to do
right,
as well.
yeah,
We have that in
yeah.
common.
And as you know, we organized in 2010 the International Conference on Philosophical Practice. It was the 10th,
Hmm.
and it was the second time that we did it in Leusden, where you might say our home is the International School of Philosophy. And in that conference, developed the idea together with Leon de Haas that we really should focus on experience. So we did actually as much workshops as possible, and not so many lectures, but workshops. That was the idea, and showing your practice, which is also the idea that is usually practiced at the International School of Philosophy, where when we gather, for instance, for Socratic dialogue, practitioners show the different kind of workshops, and we evaluate them, we talk about them, we exchange the experience. But that's indeed, I think a way that we Dutch practitioners like to work, and that's our tradition, you might say. But that was the way in 2006 that I got into philosophical practice. Well, as you also might know, it's not something you can live from. So I partly, let's say, 50% of my time was devoted then to philosophical practice, and the other 50% I was working as a medical epidemiologist, so counting diseases and in general, and death in particular.
Were you in the field at all, or was this epidemiology a study of data, more or less?
Yeah, this was a study of data. Yeah, and it was, of course, it was a rather boring job, you might say, until, of course, the COVID crisis appeared. Because then it suddenly became a very exciting job to count the numbers of cases and to count the number of deaths. And then again, the philosophy, and that was because I retired from that job now since 1 year, and I concluded with a paper, a philosophical paper actually on counting the COVID death. Because I noticed that in counting the number of COVID deaths, it is still, from a philosophical point of view, rather old-fashioned monocausal idea was applied.
Yes,
So
and
I criticized.
we had a controversy about that here
Yeah,
as well, because the people were perishing of underlying comorbidities, but they were really
right. Yeah,
treated by
that's it.
COVID. So do you
That's
count
it.
COVID, or do you count, the
Yeah, that's it.
comorbidities?
Yeah, so I elaborated on that idea of monocausality, and I compared it with ideas that are in philosophy on causal networks, multi-causality, Hilary Putnam, that kind of philosophers, and then see what is the consequence for your actual count of cases. And I could show that if you indeed take comorbidity into account, your numbers go down to about, at least in Holland, with about 50 to 60%. So it's a different way to look at the same thing, you might say. And I concluded my career in epidemiology with that paper. So from mono to multi-causality applied to the counting of COVID death, which was, again, you might say, I came out with integrating medicine and philosophy in some sense.
Sure.
But that was so that was a bit about my medical career. And in 2006, I started my practice in the city of Rotterdam. As you announced, individual consultations, Socratic group dialogue, and courses on the art of living. And then I was attracted to a topic that, I am well known for, the philosophical walks. So I first started the philosophical walks also at the International School of Philosophy in Leusden, in a format that we went out walking in the woods along the heather, and I was reading pieces of text from mainly from Stoic philosophers about nature. And then we returned to the meeting room, and we had a kind of Socratic dialogue about the experiences of people during the walk. We were trying to conceptualize that experience and compare the different ways or different outcomes of the conceptualization. That were actually the early walks in Leusden. And in Rotterdam, I started city walks. And the city walks were designed that I went, we walked through the city, different places, and we stopped. And also at those places we contemplate the architecture or a river going along the city, or some places. We contemplate them. Again, a conceptualization was the aim. What kind of ideas come up at that particular place? And also, is this a coincidence, or are we in some way, are those ideas attached to the place? That's what placefulness, what is or became my line of research, you might say. And also from the 10th ICPP on, I started to form it more as a kind of Socratic exercise, which now has the form that I put in quotes of philosophers. So people go out walking with a quote of a philosopher, and they have to find a place suiting the quote, the concept that is in the quote, and the place. So that triangular, you might say, is triangulation is their assignment for walking. The walk is what I call just like life. It is a kind of coincidence, what kind of quote you get. Also, you work on the conditions of uncertainty. You don't know how we will walk or what places we will meet, and you have to choose. You have to pick your place while not being aware of what might be in the future, or there might be better places. You have to choose your place. You have to defend your choice, you might say. So I think the walk is like life. Life in a kind of contingency, uncertainty, making choices, defending your choices. And that is the way that I developed my walks and conducted them, as you might know, in the meantime, all over the world, from
Well,
Japan, China, Cambodia, Sweden, of course, Belgium, France, Zagreb lately. So,
and don't forget Athens. I did a walk with
Athens, that
I
was a
did a
beautiful
walk
walk,
with you there.
2013.
And we've
2013,
been in Japan together, China together,
Japan.
Korea. We've been all over.
Yeah,
We've been meeting each
yeah,
other's Peter for more
yeah, yeah,
years
yeah,
than I
yeah.
can remember. But it was only very recently in Lanzhou last November where we actually had a day off. You remember? And we
Yeah,
had a beautiful
another walk. Yeah,
beside the Yellow River, not a
the
philosophical,
Yellow River.
turned into
Very
that.
good.
But we finally got to know each other a little bit better, and
Yeah,
that was after many, many
yeah.
walks. What's the ideal number for you? Is there an ideal number that you like to have on a walk? Is too few or too many a problem, or is there a sort of a better number in the middle?
15 to 20 is an ideal number, but you can do it with a big group, with very small groups. Let's say also there is you need at least 6 or 7 people. With 2 or 3 people, it becomes very difficult, but not impossible. And you mentioned the walk in Athens. That was indeed very important to mention because the idea of the philosophical walk originated from 2 things, and one is Plato. Of course, we like to base our philosophical practice on or grounded on philosophy, and the grounds for that philosophical walk are in Plato's dialogue Phaedrus. Phaedrus is the only dialogue that Socrates and his interlocutor Phaedrus are going for a walk outside the city walls of Athens. And they walk along the river Ilissos in search for a good place to philosophize. So that was actually that I thought, hey, this is the idea that some places are suitable for philosophizing and others not. And that is what we are practicing also in the walk. We are searching for our spot, our place to philosophize. And I think, of course, that the human being is actually the connection between that place, the concept, and the quote. So it is his or her place, but the idea was actually taken up from Plato's Phaedrus. And so sometimes at the start of the walk, to prime the people, to get them into the mood, I read that particular beginning of the Phaedrus with the famous sentence, "Hey Phaedrus," Socrates says, "Hey Phaedrus, where do you come from and where are you going?" Actually, in ordinary language, but a very deep question, you might say. Where are you from and where are you going? And then they go out for the walk and searching for the place and see the metaphorical side of nature surrounding them in order to philosophize. That was one of my important sources. Another source is what I think that if you look at the history of philosophy, you actually in the personal biography see a lot of philosophers walking. It already starts with the Peripatos in Athens, Aristotle walking with his students, but also think of Nietzsche going up and down the mountains. Think of Kant with his very accurate walk every morning, 1 hour in
They
Königsberg,
would set
Germany.
their time. They would set their clocks by
People could set a clock on it. Yeah. And also then think of their philosophy. The walk actually seems to symbolize their philosophy. Nietzsche with his fights and and Kant with his very strict and accurate philosophy. Think of Heidegger walking in the woods. So I think that actually their ideas were produced during that walks, or might have been produced during that walks, while we're looking at their text as a kind of result. So
Yeah.
then again, I thought, hey, walking is a way of developing philosophical ideas. So let's do that. And let's help people a bit to structure it as a Socratic dialogue.
That's great. And the
And
quotes that you offer are really kind of catalysts, aren't they? They're catalyzing this process.
yeah, right. Because otherwise, that was my first experience of the walks. Sometimes it's too difficult for people, or it is sometimes too free, not, you might say, philosophical enough. If you think of my colleague Leon de Haas, he was always asking the question, what is philosophical about your conversation, about your practice? A very good and deep inquiry. And so that was also what I say, all right, to get people more into philosophy, I use those quotes. And for a general walk, I use quotes from Eastern or Western philosophy, more or less distributed along the history of both kinds of philosophy, Indian philosophy, of course, but also if there is a walk for instance, for a school or for a kind of company, or for a group of people with a theme, a birthday or a jubilee or something, I can pick philosophical quotes according to that jubilee, or about learning, teaching, for schools, for instance. So then I use quotes according to the theme of the walk, and you can specify. But for general walks, I take them from Eastern, Western, Indian philosophy, and people get quotes randomly. So that is actually, a way. I think I became well known in the movement for the philosophical walks, and how I developed them.
Yes, definitely. So you also are able to package this for companies. You mentioned.
Yes, we can do it for companies. I was also for a while involved in quality management, while quality management in healthcare namely for non-profit organizations was coming up, and then we did actually Socratic dialogues about what is quality. Trying to analyze the experience of workers, and even from doctors and patients, and see what is quality for them, what kind of examples come up, how can we define quality, and from the definition translate it into policy. And that was the time before that the quality systems came in, because then the organizations say, just do me a quality system, you might say. But before that, and talking about the 90s, this was in the 90s, that Socratic dialogue actually was booming in the Netherlands. You might know that from Jos Kessels, Socrates at the Marketplace, very fundamental
Sure. Well,
book.
maybe our listeners don't know, but Joost Kessels was one of the main pioneers in the Dutch group, and
Yeah, yeah,
he had a firm. He had a philosophical
yeah,
firm.
right,
They hung out a shingle in Amsterdam.
right.
They were philosophical practitioners for hire, and his specialty was working inside of organizations, and he was
Yeah,
really good
right.
at it too.
Yeah. Very good and very successful at it. Certainly in the 1990s, and so I picked up that Socratic dialogue, as I told you already, in the medical study, and from that group, and practiced it in quality management for healthcare and non-profit organizations. So that was also a thing we were doing. I think that the Dutch practitioners. The philosophical practitioners, I always distinguish in our public philosophy. We call it publieksphilosophie. It's somewhat different than community philosophy. But one part is, I talked about the translation of academic philosophy to the general public, and vice versa, also to translate questions or themes in the general public to philosophy. But the second pillar is philosophizing with the people, and that's a very strong part of the movement in the Netherlands, where Jos Kessels was very important in introducing Socratic dialogue, and in that I think that is very typical for Dutch practitioners. We left university, as you might know. Jos Kessels, he developed his courses. Usually at Amsterdam. Amsterdam was a focus, Amsterdam University with students, but then he left university, and as you indeed mentioned, he started his private practice outside university, and became very successful with his Socratic dialogue. So most practitioners in our association now are working outside university, attached sometimes to the International School of Philosophy at Leusden. But I think that's very typical for the Dutch philosophical practitioners, that we mainly, if you think of the development of philosophical practice as a critique on academic philosophy, that was, I think, one of the main sources of Dutch philosophical practice.
Sure, but I mean, Holland has a different profile from the USA in that regard.
Yes, yes, yes. In that word, yeah,
I know many Dutch people very well, and of course, your tradition
yeah,
going back to Spinoza and before is one of free thinking, and
yeah,
it's very clear that part of the ethos of Holland is to value philosophy,
yeah,
not necessarily every day, but you have philosophy month, and
yeah,
I mean that's
yeah. That's
those are
part of the
books. They have
publicity.
philosophy month, and they
Yeah,
have every bookstore has philosophy books in the
yeah,
window. Everyone buys and wants to be
yeah,
seen with a philosophy book because they value it. In America, I used to joke we don't have philosophy nanosecond outside the academy. People do not. Well, we're starting to make some inroads. I'd have to say
yeah,
things have changed definitely in the last 20 years. But initially, we had a very different kind of concept of what to do with liberty, and philosophizing was not on the top of everybody's agenda every day. Uh,
right.
so you have a very friendly kind of a hinterland, a kind of an ethos in which to build. I
Yeah,
wanted to ask you something else before we move on. I have a few more questions before we open the mic. And one of these goes back to this notion of placefulness. And it's
yeah,
just a question because it's something in my background. Back in the day, there was a very popular book by a journalist called Carlos Castaneda. I don't know if it was, oh, you know Castaneda.
yeah, yeah. We know him. Yeah,
A
yeah.
shaman named Don Juan. You
Carlos
know? Okay,
Castaneda.
you know
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
story.
yeah.
Great. So early on, when his guide takes him to Don Juan's house, you may recall, and he's not allowed to go inside and meet the shaman until he finds his place on the veranda. There's a big porch,
Yeah,
and it's empty. And
yeah.
his challenge is find your place. He doesn't understand at first what it's
Yeah,
mean, but he has to find a place. Is this
right.
something that syncs with your idea of placefulness as well?
This is the idea, Lou. This is a very good angle. I didn't thought about Carlos Castaneda anymore, but you're completely right. Yeah, and of course you might say his approach is metaphysical, or while my approach is more rational, and but it's also Platonistic. I think there is an idea, a concept that corresponds with the place because of the people. That is not, of course, Platonic. That would be my theory, you might say. But indeed, Carlos, yeah, like Carlos Castaneda, this is the thing. Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
that's what you made me think of, Peter. I was getting
yeah.
flashbacks
I
on
saw
your
medium.
walks, okay?
Thank you for this.
Looking for the place, yeah.
But let me again. It is important to mention indeed the Dutch public philosophy went booming in the 90s out of, you might say, the school of the International School of Philosophy in Leusden. And it's important maybe to mention that it was founded in 1914 by a Dutch mathematician, Brouwer,
Oh, Leo Brouwer. Yeah,
Leo Brouwer,
that's
who is
right.
said to have
The
influenced
intuitionist,
Wittgenstein
yeah.
in coming back into philosophy. And his companion was a writer, novel writer, Frederik van Eden. And so, International School of Philosophy in 1914, World War One, we were neutral, completely isolated, you might say. So it was not, in the sense, in a practical way, very international, because yeah, there were no possible connections with other countries or other people. But translation of the academic philosophy for the general public was their main aim. And they were also already in the early years starting up with Nelsonian Socratic dialogue, because they knew that it had been developed by Nelson and Heckman in Germany around that time. And their aim to let's say, translate philosophy for the general public has been there for a long time. And in the 90s, and they offered courses, you might say, courses, lectures, and people could go to that school in the middle of the Netherlands, in the woods, to take those lectures and courses, to withdraw, you might say, for a while and philosophize and then come back. So it was not a school with a kind of program, you might say. Huh? It was a school in the Platonic way, that you go there for a day or a week to philosophize, and then you go back into the ordinary life again.
Yeah.
But in the 90s, they started a magazine, philosophy magazine, it was called, And this was very successful. It went huge. It had in its heydays it had about 25,000 subscribers, and it could say, "Hey, we have more subscribers than even than the Journal of Philosophy has all over the world." 25,000 and somewhat others who just sold who sold or bought the magazine, and it was, you might say, it could be used for in waiting rooms for doctors, dentists. It spread all over the country, and translating philosophy for the general public, but also it took up social themes, and then philosophers were asked to philosophize about those themes. So that was really, you might say, a big start of the public philosophy that grew and grew with, indeed, like you say, a whole month for the philosophy, a night for the philosophy, so festivals, and a national philosopher, so kind of official recognition of public philosophy, even a professor now for public philosophy. So
Yes.
It ended up in a kind of official recognition of that thing, you might say. And in the 80s, the philosophical practitioners joined that movement, especially in philosophizing with the people.
Mm-hmm.
So that International School of Philosophy at Leuven is still, and it is, you might say, our home of the philosophical practitioners. But it's a very important focus point of the philosophical practice in the Netherlands. And well, you know it. You were there.
I've been there a
with the
couple of
international
times, and
conferences
I love
a
it.
couple of times.
It's a beautiful place.
Beautiful.
And there are lovely walks. I've taken some of those walks alone along the canal, and there's a gorgeous cemetery actually next door. And I was walking in that cemetery one day at the 10th conference, and somebody came up to me and said, "This is one of Holland's best cemeteries." And I said, "According to whom?" And that sort of became very quiet. I'm not sure that the inhabitants have bragging rights, but apparently visitors think of it in high regard. But it is a fabulous setting. And I think it's not an accident. I mean, you have this philosophical tradition. So let me ask you a couple more questions, okay, if I may. Just an observation. I remember we had a wonderful day in Kamakura with Tetsuo Akono and his colleague, and they showed us one Zen temple after another. We spent the whole day exploring these magnificent, lovely retreats in Kamakura, and I even found D.T. Suzuki's gravestone.
Suzuki.
Yeah, right. Suzuki's buried in one of them, and that was a bit of a
you found
revelation. Yeah, well, I stumbled across it. I wasn't looking for it. Best way to find things sometimes is not look for them. But we didn't talk very much, Peter, because the what was weighing on us were the centuries of silence in these beautiful Buddhist retreats. Right. Countryside of Kamakura. A really, really lovely day we had. So let me ask you now a couple of other questions.
Well, maybe one remark, Lou.
Sure.
Indeed, silence, because you mentioned silence, is an important aspect of my walk. So actually, my golden rule of the walk is we walk or we talk. So for people who don't know the walks I explained just now, so they're getting the quotes, and then we start to walk in silence. And at the place, if somebody finds his spot, then he calls for a stop, and we discuss the experience of that place, you might say. But now that you talk about silence, a very important part of my walks too, to indeed enable all the participants to contemplate the environment, their own thoughts, and to try and connect by an ID.
Indeed.
Silence. So
that, and the other thread of this mention of Asia is that, well, we were treated to a very beautiful tour of that National Regional Museum in Lanzhou, which has, of course, a lot of Buddhist relics, a lot of ancient history, because Buddhism reached those places, almost Mongolia, as well as it permeated the rest of Asia. So only there and then did we begin discussing Asian philosophy, and then I learned that you have interest in Buddhism I never knew you had. So tell us about this. How did you become attracted to Asian wisdom traditions?
Yeah, well, maybe one of my nephews is a Buddhist monk, so we discuss, you might say, the Buddhism a lot. interact and learn from each other. And also, I find in Buddhism, during especially my traveling to Thailand and Cambodia, there is an openness to questioning, and we very meet each other at looking for the right question. So not so much for the metaphysical part. In Plato, I noticed there's actually one thing that doesn't seem to be criticized, and that is actually the rebirth. Plato thinks that we, after our death, we're going to meet the ideas, spend some time in the world of the ideas, and then we come back into this world again. And our knowledge is just recognizing the ideas in the intermediate phase of between the lives. And so looking very much like the reincarnation idea in Buddhism. That was my idea in Buddhism. Shortly after meeting the Chinese philosophy, I was struck by Confucius and his Analects, a basic work for Chinese philosophy. And my personal project now, after retirement in my institute, Erasmus Institute, is two things actually to mention. It is reading the Analects as a philosophical practitioner. So I'm trying to read it from the point of view that I am a philosophical practitioner, and attach exercises, a lot of exercises that we do in our Dutch tradition, to the sayings of Confucius, because I see the connection. I can see the connection, and I think that is the kind of thing I can offer and contribute to. And I do actually the same thing. You see behind me a painting, and you might wonder what it is. Anyone got an idea?
Okay, art history pop quiz. Who can identify the artist?
Or the idea in the painting?
Okay, you're going to have to tell us.
I tell you, this is called. This is Benoit Hermans, a Dutch artist, and it's called Remains of the Day. And you might know that Remains of the Day is a Freudian concept. It's attributed to Freud for explaining dreams. You know, Freud his Traumdeutung is that dreams offer us images out of our experience of the past day, and then in an associative way that of course give rise to kind of speculation about their meaning. But this painting is called Remains of the Day. You see the little child there reaching out to some kind of castle that is appearing in his view and in his mind.
So it's a dream.
But so my second project, actually from my time out of psychiatry, is also reading now Freud's case histories as a philosophical practitioner, because I think that if you can do that and you can reveal Freud as a philosopher and even as a philosophical practitioner again. So two projects I can now take up after retirement. In my Erasmus Institute, I frame them as, you might say, traditional scientific projects with an objective, motivation, question, and method to work. But of course now with time frame, because now I'm kind of not limited anymore in time, you might say. But that's the way I, let's say, give my Erasmus Institute for Philosophical Practice form. I called it after Erasmus, of course. I worked in Rotterdam, the city of Erasmus, you might say. And it's also in Erasmus. I mentioned Descartes during our conversation as one of the philosophers I recognize myself in. And I say this repeated itself during my life, and it repeated itself again when I read the works of some of the works of Erasmus.
The Complaint of Peace has been with me for a very long time.
The Complaint of Peace, yeah, very important. Complaint of Peace. His Praise of Folly, of course.
Oh yes, and Praise of Folly, all of that. He was
Praise of Folly.
He was a brilliant Renaissance thinker, really, and a fairly to the Enlightenment, without a doubt. Very penetrating and beautiful mind. So it doesn't sound like you're retired at all, Peter. I
No.
think you're just finding new ways to be busy, and this will segue if you want to share with us your fountain of youth. You have now a new parenting project, which is amazing. So if you want to tell us about that, it's fine, and then we'll open the mic.
You mean my children? No,
Yes, yes.
no. Yeah. Yes, I founded a parenting project. With two lovely daughters now, 6 and 8 years old, and that's sometimes why I'm not able to travel in the summer to our very interesting conferences. But let me say, I also think of the life phase that I'm now in. You might call it retirement, but I also now think my age is age of transference of knowledge and experience to the next generation, to the younger generation. And we might also, with the questions, elaborate a bit on. I call myself the second generation of philosophical practitioners in the Netherlands. After the first, there was Ida Jongsma and Hogendijk, Eite Vening, Dries Boele, Mirjam van Rijen. That were the first, you might say.
Right.
I think in 2005-06 that I entered it with, for instance, Leon de Haas, Klein Luchtenbelt. We were a kind of second generation. And now there should be a kind of third generation, I think, coming up. And we might elaborate on the differences between those generations, of course. But
well, you'll do that when you sit down to write your memoirs eventually.
yeah,
Not
yeah,
tomorrow, but we want the history of philosophical practice in Holland would make a very
yeah,
interesting read.
yeah.
All of us, I'm sure. So would be okay if we open the floor now?
Let's open the floor, Maroon.
All
Yeah.
right. Okay. Kevin Kales has raised his hand. Very quick on the draw. Kevin, please unmute and go ahead.
Hello. Thank you for the conversation. I'm really interested in this placefulness and philosophy walks. It made me think about something, and I feel very compelled to comment and kind of share it. Many years ago now, when I was still a graduate student, I read this book. It was titled Phraseklea. I think the author was Sven Bro. But the book was about the development of writing and reading, and in particular, the movement of reading from reading out loud to silent reading. And so it started by taking a look at ancient Greek culture and oral culture, where many people, at the time couldn't even read. And it focused on this funerary statue, Phraseklea, which is where the book gets its title, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what's interesting about the inscription on some of these early funerary statues is that they're written in first person. So it would say, I am. And so since there are only a few people who can read it, when you come across these, it was expected in practice that the person who could read it would read it out loud so everyone could hear it. And because it was written in the first person voice, the author theorized that it would be understood that the statue is kind of borrowing the voice of the speaker and almost speaking through them, because they would be saying I am when they're clearly not the dead person, right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like you're giving a voice to the people and the place in which you are, right? And so what you were talking about with placefulness it made me think, you're giving this voice to the unique place, the architecture and the people where you are. I don't know if you're thinking about it that way, but I just felt very compelled to share that because you excited me with this connection.
Yeah, very interesting, and also very, for me, compelling contribution. Very interesting. But my reaction would be that indeed it's the place speaking through the people, but also the people speaking through the place in my exercise. You see some very personal conceptualizations, you might say, and of course we can think of, is it really possible for a person to express himself as a unique person in terms of language philosophy and Wittgenstein's private language argument. This might be a problem, but people use concepts to transmit something, you might say. What is required, of course, that placefulness is a term I met. It's a kind of new word, neologism, hinting at mindfulness, of course, mindfulness. But a critique of mindfulness might be that the mind cannot be free from an attachment to a place, and that's where the change to placefulness takes place, you might say. And so in my walks and my exercise, I think indeed you are right. The place is speaking through the person, and the person is also speaking through the place. And I'm very, you brought me to an idea that using the personal pronoun I would be actually a very good exercise. And now the people in my exercises and walks conceptualize in a rather general way, you might say. But I think it would be very interesting to modify the exercise a bit and ask them to conceptualize while using the pronoun I. Thank you for that idea.
And thank you for your answer.
Okay, Kevin, thank you for chiming in. Anyone else want to ask something or say something? Please feel free. We have lots of time, and we have a really great guest. So, looking for electronic hands. I have more questions for you, Peter. Believe me,
Yeah, that's okay.
no shortage of questions. If people want to just remain in the audience, that's quite all right as well. But we
Well,
can give
the
others.
thing that I like to add to my introduction, we didn't mention Pierre Hadot. I don't know if you people know
Oh,
the
we
French.
know Pierre Hadot. Philosophy as a way of life has been a
Yes,
huge bestseller in English.
yeah, yes.
Although it's back to the
He
90s again.
yeah, he has been very influential to my thinking, also to the courses I conduct on the art of living, but also in the walks, you might say. Also to the last questioner, to live a concept, that was an idea that Pierre Hadot was on and focused on, and say that was actually, according to him, an original meaning of ancient philosophy that we lost because it withdraw itself into academy. So to live a concept, that is also one of my aims that I'm trying to get my hands on in my philosophical exercises. And as far as the walks, I can also say that I conducted walks now in many different countries, many different cultures, with the same quotes, Lou, because you have been there now for several times. You might notice, hey, this is the same quotes coming up. So you might say a book I'm thinking about, or that I'm working about, is to compare the different outcomes of the conceptualizations of the same quote at different places and different cultures. I prefer then the word places. So China, a place in China, as you say, the Yellow River, Nanjing, different Nanjing with its very particular history, you might know. So I can compare now the different outcomes of the conceptualizations at the different places. So my book on placefulness will be a general introduction about the idea and places. The different walks, a kind of you might say, empirical philosophical study, compare the different concepts that came out the walks at different places, to end up with a kind of reflection on the meaning of placefulness.
Yeah,
But
well,
that's a project that I've, let's say, material in my hands and I'm working on. The reason why it's not finished yet, Lou, and you have written and finished many books. I've written many papers, but I should finish a book now, and that's maybe something to elaborate on. It's because of, let's say, the new developments that we're now heading in. I think the next generation is more or less into virtual culture, AI writing books, and things that we can hardly compare from human writings anymore. So, and that is a bit the reason why I'm hesitating. That I think, how should and could we anticipate on that kind of developments? So actually, I'm thinking about to have AI finish the book, and finish that material that I have gathered up till now. And what I noticed in our interaction with AI, that it's not finished in a sense that that you say, hey, AI, you write the end of my book, but that every particular reader can use AI to finish his or her version of the book.
Well, that's a different story. Using
Yes,
AI as an interactive medium, so the book could have a different ending depending on the reader.
yes,
That's an
yes.
innovative
That
idea.
would
I
be
think
my idea.
your contribution would be significant anyway, even if it were done in the old school written tradition with a book on placefulness. I think
Ah,
that's a gap or a void in the literature currently, and that would be a welcome contribution. If you're going to bundle this with new technologies, then it might have a better chance of being
yeah,
sold. I mean, I don't know.
yeah.
People are not reading so much. They're younger people are listening to audiobooks
Right,
and using AI for all kinds of things. So I think it's a
right.
compliment to you to even want to be staying with the very rapid evolution of this technology. It's in its inception, but it's causing us nightmares in the academy because we can't ask students to write essays anymore. So it's completely disrupted the written tradition. However, that's a different story. So Karen has her hand up. Okay, Karen, please go ahead. Unmute.
Yeah, here's a question from a Christian perspective, but I've had this kind of daydream or thought about the resurrection and the ascension and different things. And I think of Christ on the road to Emmaus, and he's walking along talking to people. Well, I think heaven, in a Christian perspective, is not a place, but even in the resurrected state, we're in a place. So I've had this thought lately. I wanted to ask my niece after the resurrection, I'd like to do the Appalachian Trail with her.
You have 3 months or 6 months to do it. It's a long trail. It starts in Maine and ends in Georgia. You got to
I
do.
know, but any moment. I mean, this is the thing with placefulness and being in a place and walking. And I think there's something very deep there. I really do. Like I say, from a Christian perspective,
Yeah,
God is everywhere, but
yeah.
Jesus incarnate is not. And
Well,
somehow,
yeah. Let
so I
me
think of
say
these
this,
things.
and it's a bit related also to my paper on causality, that if you think of placefulness, don't think of it as Euclidean. Eh? I think that that Einstein indeed developed his idea of time-space, as a kind of substance. And I think that is something that I was also surprised that it's not something that has been taught at schools, how we really have to deal with that idea of time space. But so I'm trying to get a hold of it. And if you talk about Christ and his appearances, I think that indeed time place is a better explanation than the Euclidean time. Hey? You get into problems explaining it if you think about the Euclidean idea of a place, so somebody being on a particular spot, you might say. But in the idea of time space, the appearance of Christ and his walk and what you just mentioned is not so much of a dilemma or appearance if you think of time space. So the placefulness is also a concept that should open up a different. I'm hesitating to call it perspective on place, on Euclidean's place. I am a follower. I mentioned Brouwer. Brouwer is a founder of intuitionistic logic, and intuitionistic logic also has, you might say, tried to develop another idea of a topos, and being atopos as a possibility when you think of so being without a place, you might say, an Euclidean place. If you think of the space-time substance that Einstein actually discovered for us. So you understand a bit of my reaction to your...
Well, Einstein is another story, but I just want to say, throw this out. I think spirits are not in place.
No, right.
But,
yeah, I would agree. I would agree.
What Christ is in place, he didn't bilocate. So that preciousness of where he was in his body at any one moment, that's something. Just at this moment, he's on the road to Emmaus or whatever. Heaven will be spiritual. We'll all have this spiritual continuous encounter, but I don't think we can all be physically next to Christ in a place, physically that in that way. That's a whole. But I've been thinking about place a lot along those lines. So appreciate it.
You need to take a walk with Peter, then, okay? That's
if we could take a walk, but we're far apart. But if you want to communicate about it, I'll be happy to do that with you. And my email address, I think that Lou can provide you my email address, or
yes, of course.
You can find
you can put it in
the
the chat room, Peter. Why don't you just put it in the chat room right now if you want to do that?
Yeah, I'm going to try.
And everyone can copy it.
Yeah.
And can be in touch with you. And while you're doing that, we have Rick and Jose. Let me just add something. Some people may not be aware of the intuitionist school, but they're a fascinating bunch. Leo Brouwer was one of the main proponents. And what they were trying to do is to rewrite truth value-based logics without any recourse whatsoever to reductio arguments. They consider the reductio arguments to be very suspicious. There is indeed something although in a truth table equivalency, of course, not A is equivalent to A, but the intuitionists didn't like it. And so they tried to redevelop all the theorems of mathematics without using any reductio, and they were not able to reproduce them all. So they were purists, and it turns out that their canon of theorems is much, much smaller because as it happens, there are many theorems in logic and mathematics that absolutely no one's found other ways to prove other than by the reductio indirect means. So the intuitionists were very, very interesting. Yes, a really great bunch of people. But the reductio argument, it doesn't wash in ordinary language either. You could say, I'm like my father, and it's not the same as asserting that I'm not unlike my father. Okay? If you think about the semantic content, there's definitely a potential disconnect there, although they're logically equivalent when you symbolize them. But there's still something very suspect about the reductio, and the intuitionists wanted to get rid of it. What a bold move that was. Anyway, Karen, take a walk with Peter. Okay?
Yeah, you're invited if you come to Holland, or if I come to the United States, no problem. Okay, and I like your idea is very interesting about Christ. So, and if we communicated by him, you can find my email address now in the chat. I'll be happy to elaborate on that with you. Great. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Karen. Okay, thank you very much. Rick, and then Jose. Go ahead, Rick.
Sure. Hi, Peter.
Hello, Rick.
I did enjoy doing your walk with you in Diogenes Village there. That was great. And I remember immediately thinking also about Castaneda, finding his spot. And my remark is kind of related to that, and maybe even to the last one, bringing in the supernatural things like Jesus and whatnot. Because Castaneda's conception of the spot, I think, was something, I don't know, supernaturalistic maybe in some way. As a shaman, his teacher,
I think so, yeah.
But synchronicity-wise, ironically, just as I was about to raise my hand, because I wanted to ask you about the related concept of what I guess you could call timefulness. If space-time is one thing and not two, then spacefulness and timefulness are the same thing in some sense. That's number one. And you seem to be broaching on that when you were talking about, space-time. But yeah, so yeah, and also this idea of walking where some powerful being walked. People go on pilgrimages because of this
Yeah,
idea that there's something shamanistic about the place because so and so did this there or this happened there and everything. And whether it's something like a spirit or whatever, who knows? But I'm curious to suggest to you to develop, if you're interested in trying to figure out, like you already said, you're not sure how to do it, to figure out what timefulness might be. That's one suggestion
yeah,
to possibly develop. But then the other thing I wanted to share with you is I've been doing a lot of research on the possibility of paranormal phenomena being real and not necessarily non-naturalistic, X-Files kind of thing or whatever. And I come across this theory that since we have spatial non-locality, quantum entanglement spatially, two particles
yeah,
can be light years apart, but if they were ever next to each other, you touch one, it's as if you touched both in some sense. If space-time is not separate except conceptually, metaphysically, if it's one thing, then there must also be temporal entanglement or
yeah,
temporal non-locality, in which case, and one of the theories is, of course, your own consciousness is connected with itself over time. So precognition would be a function of you being connected with your future consciousness, whatever. I just thought I would throw some of those suggestions out at you, not necessarily going anywhere, just something that if anybody was going to research the idea, it would be you, I would imagine.
yeah,
That's number one.
yeah,
The other thing I wanted to just ask you, or this is a much more practical question, is
yeah.
have you ever done this? I would imagine you probably have, and I might have been tuning out a few times during the Q&A with Lou because I was doing
Mhm.
some email. But what about peripatetic philosophical counseling with one-on-one with a client? Do you do that? Or have you done it? Have you thought about doing it? Like instead of meeting a client in one place and staying there,
Van
walking with
action.
the client? So these are two different, totally different topics. Oh, Peter seems frozen.
Yes, it looks like you froze him, Rick. I don't know, he was doing
I threw quantum temporal entanglement. He's in the
fine.
future right now. Maybe actually he's in the past and the future. Who knows?
Yes. Well,
I get in
okay.
and out
There it
again.
is.
Yes, this
Well,
is
and
because we're talking about delocalization and
yeah,
non-locality. We did
You
you
got thrown into another
you're
dimension, Peter.
yeah,
demonstrating this. Zoom is capable of it,
yeah.
apparently.
And this
Okay,
was
welcome back. Thank you.
synchronicity, Rick. I think about synchronicity by
Yes.
your remarks. But so please repeat the question.
Um,
Oh, yeah. You're all about walking philosophy. What about philosophical counselors walking with their clients? Have you
Yes, of
done
course.
that
Yeah,
yeah? Okay.
yeah, I did it. Yeah, but let me say that in my philosophical counseling, I start out with exploring the theme of a client. I avoid the word problem or dilemma because, in order not to medicalize, you might say, the whole situation. So, in exploring the theme of the client, we can use that walking by having the client choosing a spot and his or her spot in the city. Especially, it was very useful to do that in the city, and then explore the theme, try to conceptualize the theme in a new way, or so that the client could develop a new point of view, as Achenbach often calls it, a new way to look at his theme.
Talking about synchronicity, I had never heard of Carlos Castañeda, and then I realized he was born in the same country I was born, which is in Peru. And he came to North America about the same age I came to Canada. That's where I am right now.
what part of Canada
So
are you in?
in Toronto.
Okay.
So there is synchronicity for you. Anyway, the question I wanted to ask, what it is that I'm doing here was the next question. I basically focus on philosophy for children, and
Right.
interested now in how the philosophical practice can be elevated to to an adult level. The funny thing is that my background is not philosophy. I'm an engineer who has retired after 40 years in working in a big corporation. So I'm not your typical philosopher. The question I wanted to ask Peter is, Peter, can you relate or share some actual how people that have gone with you in the subject of walks and placefulness, how have they actually described their experience? Can you think of, Paul and Mary and Sophia, whoever people that you have been with?
Yeah.
How have they described the experience?
Is the connection fluent now? Connection good now?
The connection is not great. I'm sorry, we're not hearing you as well as we'd like to.
See if Peter, why don't you try turning off your video? I think his bandwidth is too small.
Okay, try speaking.
Yes, I tried this way.
Much better.
This is yeah, much better. Yeah, all right.
Well,
Maybe
better from the
image,
audio perspective. At least
no.
hear you. We can always Photoshop your picture back in.
Yeah, okay. No, the people describe their experience as in terms of attention. That's also why placefulness is a kind of variant of mindfulness. You know, people become aware suddenly of details of the surroundings, if it's nature or in the city, because they can focus in the silence. They walk in silence. Contemplate the quote and the concept that comes up, but also there is an attention to the environment, and then suddenly when they find the place, usually the experience is a kind of personal one. So people relate to the place because they can relate it to some kind of experience in their life. And that's actually where I think we leave academical practice, because we are not looking for a kind of official or academical interpretation of the quote, but because we are looking for philosophical practice, a personal interpretation of the quote. And the conceptualization is what I think makes it philosophical, as a basic philosophical competence. So attention, some kind of personal experience, that is what usually, the way people talk about their experience during the walk. So a remembrance of some kind of experience in their life. Did it come through? Yeah.
Yeah, I understood what you're explaining to me, but I'm sure some of the people who walked with you didn't describe it that way. They used probably simple statements like, I felt at home, or I felt this. That's what I was after.
Yeah.
What have they actually shared with you?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Sometimes they use literally the words. All right, I've been watching the environment or the architecture very carefully in order to see or to look for the connection between the quote, concept, and the place. Or sometimes they indeed say, it was mentioned before, hey, it was I stayed open and I let the environment speak to me, and suddenly there was a connection between me, the quote, the concept, and the place. So and also that's I described it in the papers I wrote about the philosophical walks. You can read it there. These were usually the two ways in which people describe their experience.
Okay.
And maybe it's interesting to add that also in the exercise I added that it was not only finding your spot, and then we talk and about the explanation, but also on that spot I invite a group to ask the person who has conceptualized at that spot to ask him or her a question. And then allow them to question the person. Several questions are asked, and I ask the person who conceptualized to pick out a question. So because otherwise I thought, all right, you have early conceptualizers at the beginning of the walk, and they will walk, and the rest of the walk they have nothing to do, you might say. But now, if they have conceptualized, they pick out a question. The question is not answered. They choose the question, and then we walk on. So first you walk part of the walk. You are looking for your place, for your spot, and then second part of the walk for that person, he or she walks with a question. And at the end of the walk, of course, we can evaluate. What kind of question did you pick out? What do you think of it? What maybe is your answer to it or your reaction to it? Did it change your conceptualization? That is two, you might say, parts in the walk for the particular participant.
Okay, understood.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, you're still on. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Jose, for chiming in. And I've got to say,
Yes.
don't downplay your engineering experience. We have a pretty big engineering school at City College, one of the only public engineering schools left in New York State. And I have to say that our engineering students come up with the best philosophical questions. They really do. I mean, the reputation is very practical, as you know, but engineers wonder, and there are some tremendous philosophical questions that, in my experience teaching a broad spectrum of students, engineers come up with some great stuff. So I think we have to respect you also for your intellect, not only your practicality. But anyway,
Yeah, and I like to add that, let's say, the philosophy with children is one of the most, you might say, most successful parts of the philosophical practice in Holland. If there are practitioners who really can live from being a philosophical practitioner, then it are the practitioners that are focused on philosophy with children. Because since the 1990s, many schools ask for facilitators who can train the teachers in doing philosophy with children, and that is a really, you might say, booming business. The books of Oscar Brenivier really are distributed very well in the Netherlands, and I don't know if you know that books, but they indeed show that you can philosophize with children.
Oh yeah.
In the way that because I thought you were hinting at that question, can we really philosophize with children? Well, we can in different ways, the art of questioning, but also
in fact, I was
yeah.
thinking about the other way around. I know I can philosophize with children. I don't know I can philosophize with adults.
Yes, that's a very good remark. Yeah.
We had, of course, Matthew Lipman at
Matthew
Montclair
Lipman,
State,
yeah.
who
Yes.
basically founded it.
Yes.
Bell's question, and Matt's books were again back to the early '90s, Harry Stottlemyre and so forth, and that moved philosophy for children into the spotlight in American education. Here it was a kind of story of the failure of success, though, because they were turning children into relentless Socratic inquirers, and they were beginning to irritate their parents and other teachers by many good questions, and not everybody wants to be questioned. So eventually, philosophers got out of that game here stateside and turned it over to the education people, and I think it was more assimilated into the culture that way. But it's definitely a global industry, a global movement. And a form of philosophical practice beyond a doubt. So good luck with that, Jose, in Toronto.
Yeah, and let's say my personal experience now with my own children is that you mentioned it, Lou. Asking questions is a kind of natural way for that children at that age, and so the trick is to modify the questions into what we as adults might see as philosophical questions, but it's very useful, and it's in line, you might say, with a natural way of asking questions about all kind of things. So I think very useful part of philosophical practice, the philosophy.
I see some of the philosophy for children as actually teaching the parents.
The
questions are always valid. It's the answers that sometimes are not.
Yeah, very good remark. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Jose, again. So, Peter, we have about 5 minutes, 4 minutes technically, and I have one more question for you. If you would like to revisit something that you brought up, and then we moved on, but it's a very interesting question for many of us. It has to do with your vision or your opinion, at least, about the potential alliance between philosophical practice and psychiatry. You know that Vana has been working for a number of years doing philosophical interventions with psychiatric patients in the context of the institution and in consultation with the various medical people and social workers and so forth. We also have just received a paper from Sarah Ellenbogen about actually doing philosophical counseling with psychiatric patients, which is a bit of a more of a dicey proposition. But also in Europe, I mean, I'm thinking of Johannes Thomes, who did a degree in medicine at Yale and then has become the director, or was last time I saw him, director of the psychiatry program at the University of Rostock, which has an inpatient and outpatient clinic attached to it. And he invited me. Fortunately, I don't speak German, so I was off the hook. But he wanted a philosopher to go in there and actually start doing counseling with some of his patients. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I certainly think that it is possible, and in a way, I also did it when working in psychiatry. And I can tell you, Lou, that some of the patients I met there even found their way to my philosophical practice when I went out of psychiatry and started my philosophical practice. So they appreciated philosophizing very much. So theoretical, I think no problem. We can do it, and we should do it. And even as I'm reading Freud now, you know, he is appearing as a kind of philosopher. But in my experience, my personal experience in Holland here was that the way psychiatry is embedded in medicine, you might say, is so restricting the field that you are, as a working psychiatrist, you are not free to do the philosophical consultations like Volna apparently can do. But here in Holland, I was not able, because the restrictions of the system to do that, you might say. And that's, you might say, a pity. I would think that it would contribute to the value of psychiatry very much if we could do a kind of philosophical counseling within the system or next to and supporting the system.
Yeah, I totally agree with you now, because as you say, and rightly, that psychiatry today is called molecular psychiatry. They're really
Yeah.
only interested in neurochemistry ultimately,
Yeah.
and they're not trained to talk anymore. So
Right.
there's a big gap there because people
Right.
want to talk and need to talk, regardless of what they're diagnosed and treated with, and regardless of what drugs they're taking. I think people do need to talk. It's part of our
Right.
being. So the door is open for philosophers. The problem, as you have pointed out just now, is navigating the gatekeepers of the system to find back to finding a place for ourselves within. But I think it's entirely desirable for psychiatric patients to have someone to talk to, and I can think of no better person than a philosopher, because we generally are
Right.
and curious beings, and we're not full of judgment, most of us. So we're not. I think we could have very interesting conversations with people who are being treated psychiatrically, and it would also create more opportunity for philosophers to do some constructive work outside the academy. So maybe we'll be able to figure out a way to pitch this. I think again, it's a question of making a coherent proposal to the profession, and and playing that game of getting it through channels. But I think it's a really interesting response. And Peter, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. I know it's late evening in
Yes.
Rotterdam, but it's been great to hear from you. Great to see you again. And
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
you're more than welcome. And I'll look forward to our next walk at some time and place. But be safe and well. Meanwhile, we'll keep in touch. Okay, this will get produced and uploaded. I'll let you know, and then you can share it with the Dutch network if you like.
Thank you very much, Lou. Thanks for having me. And see you on the next walk.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot again, Peter. Be well, and thanks everyone for attending.